Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. And today, we have a wonderful episode. We are going to explore a teaching by Elizabeth Towne. It's quite wonderful after I've started reading these New Thought authors on my podcast. Something incredible has happened. I've started to channel some of these authors. They start talking to me. I hear Neville tell me which lectures to do. I hear Napoleon Hill. I hear William Blake. I've heard so many different authors, and especially Elizabeth Towne. I read her book. Check out my episode where we read her book, The Life Power and How to Use It. And Elizabeth Towne was a wonderful New Thought author who wrote on New Thought at the same time as some of the greats. The interesting background tip on her is that she was the publisher of The Science of Getting Rich. If you look at some of the early major publishers of New Thought books, it was Elizabeth Towne behind the scenes. She lived to be very old, into her 90s, and that book was just kind of whimsical, and she had a certain attitude, a certain personality and character, and I could hear that, and she was starting to tell me different books of hers to read, and there was even this unusual moment where she was talking with Napoleon Hill, kind of like in a mastermind, but she wants me to read these two chapters, so I'm going to read them, and she wants me to read them in reverse order. But the main reason is we want to talk about the topic of debt in relation to the law of attraction and reality transurfing and reality creation, because it's one of the most twisted things to work with in manifestation. I get a lot of requests for coaching. I don't do any coaching right now at this moment. I may in the future. But one of the main things is I'm deep in debt and I need your help. And I feel you. I understand exactly where you're coming from, because I have been in incredibly deep debt. So I've lived off of my credit cards at points in time where if I had money available on my credit card, it was like money I had in the bank. I didn't even look at it as money on my credit cards because I didn't know what I was going to use to buy my next meal. And then it just builds on itself, and then you push it away, and it makes you sick. It gives you stress. One of the worst things you can have is debt. So the biggest problem is, if you want to address debt, the more you focus on something, the more you get. So a lot of people will try to imagine ways of being out of debt, but any sort of focus on debt will bring you more debt. It is a Chinese finger toy. So the harder you try, the worse it gets. So there's a couple of recommendations before I start reading this that I recommend in my own life that have helped me. And there's a really good affirmation that we're going to read at the end a couple of times to help you that I have used. The problem is, if you focus on something, you get more of it. And as Bob Proctor recommends, if you get a debt that you can pay, then put it on automatic payment so that you're not even paying it. Because even when you go online and check your credit card, you're starting to attract more of it. So it's hard. So you got to get into a situation where you have regular payments, and then you're focusing on the money that you have coming in, which is a very good idea. And for me, I would say I'm so happy and grateful for the complete payment of all financial obligations in God's own wonderful way. And so that works for me as affirmation and a way of thinking about debts, regularly reiterating that. Catherine Ponder has some good affirmations on debt and deals with it pretty well. But it's not talked about in a lot of this literature because the truth of it is you will get more of it. So Elizabeth Towne actually wrote about what to do when you have pressing debts. A lot of times what happens, somebody will come along and say, hey, I have to make a big payment by next week. Can you help me manifest $10,000 by next week? and there is a time squeeze on it, which often happens with debt. And for me, what I have found in my business, in some cases, the more debt you have, the more successful your company is. All debt is not bad. Somebody that has no debt probably doesn't have as successful a business if they're in business for themselves. Debt can be used to gain great amounts of wealth. I'm sure that most great businessmen also carry big loans, and it's part of the process of gaining wealth that a lot of people don't understand. But there is good and bad debt. And the kind of debt that is where you're borrowing from your future to live and experience now. And that's the hardest part for me. I always want to live the maximum perfect, wonderful experience now, and I'm willing to put up my credit card for it sometimes, and it would get me into trouble. So for me, when I was able to overcome it, it was knowing that there is a flow that comes through you, and you tune into that flow. And the reason it's amazing, I had a monthly line of credit with a business that I had to pay. It had to be paid on that day or I would lose the line of credit. And the line of credit was the only way I could maintain one of my businesses. So it would be incredibly stressful, because if I miss even $1 of that payment, and I would have these huge payments that would be like $80,000 or $100,000 or $78,000. And I would never know if I would begin knowing the time frame. Okay, I have about 16 days to pay this. And every single time I would get almost the exact amount, which I'm like, why can't I get a little bit more? So I'd get, all right, we got these next 16 days. And then 16 days, I have the exact 78,000, even sometimes down to the penny, from different business ventures that came in to pay that debt. But can we use our minds and our thoughts to overcome pressing debts? Let's listen to what Elizabeth Towne has to say in her book, How to Use New Thought in Home Life, chapter 13, to a man who has pressing debts. The one thing that is the matter with you is that you think there is something the matter with you. There isn't a thing wrong with you but that. Quit looking for troubles within or without. Quit looking for reasons why things are not as they might be if you were a different man in a different place. Accept yourself as you are. Accept your conditions as they are. Rejoice in everything exactly as it is, because everything is an opportunity for you to turn it to more beautiful results. See that you pray aplenty and always in faith, believing in your oneness with the Spirit of wisdom and power and love. Whatsoever things you desire, believe that ye receive them, and you shall have them. In other words, know that the thing you desire is already yours in spirit and in truth, and that you are daily and hourly led in right ways to work out the things you see in spirit. Now go in to win and stick to it. When John Wesley had an extra lot of work to perform, he took an extra long time for prayer in the morning. Just you see that you don't skimp your time for going into the silence and practicing new thought, no matter how much business pushes from the outside. This is the only way to get the wisdom you need to swing that work. And if you have wisdom enough, you will certainly find the money. wisdom comes from within. And if you want to dig for wisdom, you have got to dig in the silence. There is no other way. There is only one source of wisdom, and that is God within you. And the wrong steps in your past haven't a thing to do with it. No matter whether you took a wrong one or right ones, you did neither more nor less than other people are doing every day. We all take wrong steps and right steps. It doesn't matter what we did last year or last week. It is what we are doing now. Break off thy sins by rightness now. Remember that the past is of no use whatever except to learn from. Take these lessons and be glad of them, but forget all the rest. Wipe off the slate. Wipe it off every morning and begin a bright, fresh new day. Wipe off the slate every hour and begin a bright, fresh new hour. What in the world is the use of spoiling a perfectly good day, raking over steps and missteps you took last week or last year or last decade? Read Ezekiel and you will see that God doesn't visit sins upon anybody's head a minute longer than the persons themselves keep persisting in the sins. The minute the soul turns to God, all its past is forgiven. And all of God's care and wisdom goes into helping the soul work out its present good desires. Just what do you mean by you're getting temporary relief in prayer, but you do not get deliverance? True deliverance is a spiritual thing. Deliverance from worry and fret, from a sense of being in the wrong place. True deliverance is a deliverance from unright thought. Is that what you mean when you use the word? Or are you making the mistake of looking at the outward appearance and considering that you are not delivered simply because you still have debts and are still striving to accomplish things which are not yet accomplished? If so, you are looking in the wrong direction for the proof of deliverance. Look within. Now, how could you be delivered from all your debts if you are still striving to do things? No man can grow except by bursting bonds, transcending limitations, paying off old debts, and incurring new ones perpetually. But your trouble may lie in biting off more than you can chew. Perhaps you try to work out your financial problems without taking into consideration the great unexpected, the most certain factor in every problem. To leave out the great unexpected is to find yourself cramped for means on every hand. When you build a house, you count everything in and get a contract price, and then you need to add at least 50% to cover the great unexpected that always comes up. When you are starting in a business deal, you should figure as closely as possible, and then you should reckon at least 50% extra that must be taken care of in cash and credit. Otherwise, you will find yourself in perpetual hot water. See that you get your business onto such a footing that you can pay every bill promptly on the minute when it is due. This is one of the most important things if you would keep out of financial hot water. Keep your credit good and hold a reserve of credit to cover the great unexpected in the way of expense and opportunities. For the great unexpected is more often an unexpected opportunity than an item of unexpected additional expense. Cultivate thoroughness in your business calculations, and remember that the most important thing in all business is to be able to pay your bills when you are due, taking advantage of every penny of discount and paying promptly even when there is no discount. Jesus said, "Make no vows, but if you make them, keep them." Be mighty careful what kind of obligations you incur, and don't ever let a man have a chance to say you crawled out of an obligation or deferred the payment of it. If you take all your discounts, you are banking every day a big surplus of credit that can be drawn on in case of a particularly great opportunity arriving. But your reserve credit should not be drawn on once in 10 years or more, and then only temporarily. For credit is like a reserve in bank, and should always be kept there undepleted, ready for the great day of opportunity. It is the lack of this good credit that keeps you in hot water. If you are in this particular kind of hot water, sell off some land at a sacrifice or do any old thing to get yourself onto a basis where every obligation is paid promptly on the dot. If I were to step into your shoes now, and if I could get hold of more money in the regular channels to bring every bit of my business dealings up to the exact dot of cash on the minute, I would rustle around somewhere and try to get somebody to bank on me to the extent of a loan large enough to put everything on this cash basis. I would consider this far more necessary than the matter of getting land. And I think I would manage it in very much the way that you managed the land, by getting hold of somebody that had faith in me to the extent of putting up the necessary cash and not dunning me for the interest or the principal. I would try to get a hold of somebody that was willing to gamble on me on a long-time deal. If I couldn't do this, I would go to 2 or 3 of my biggest creditors and state the case and get their word to hold the accounts with me in abeyance for a long period until I could get things on to this pay on the minute basis. It seems to me that should be your endeavor now, ahead of anything and everything else. What you say about violating financial laws and then relying on having done the will of God is amusing. Likewise, it is a very common failure. It seems funny that one should violate the very laws that Jesus laid down and then lay it off on God. So many people do it. Jesus told you to make no vows, but to keep whatever vows you did make. And yet a businessman will rush in blindly and make promises that he can see no way of fulfilling, and just trust to God to work a miracle in his behalf. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. That reminds me of the way New Thought people defy all the rules of rightness and trust to luck and a few affirmations that water will be made to run uphill to please them. I just read of a case of a New Thought woman who coolly walked off with $800 worth of diamonds belonging to another woman and trusted to luck that the other woman's heart would be miraculously softened to the needs of the woman who walked off with her jewels. Which reminds me again of the time when Emerson remonstrated with Bronson Alcott for swiping his potatoes. Alcott kept on shoveling potatoes into his wheelbarrow while he scowled at Emerson and answered brusquely, "I need 'em, I need 'em." If you are violating any common financial laws, just you quit it. One of the chief laws of God is that you must stand up to what you lead other people to expect of you. If you give your word about a thing, you must keep your word, or you are breaking God's law, as well as financial laws. Get yourself square with the financial laws, and you will find deliverance in prayer, as well as consolation. To be right with God is to be right with man, inasmuch as ye do it unto the least of these human beings, you do it unto God. And there is no use trying to fool yourself by thinking that you wouldn't mind if you were in the other fellow's place. You would mind. If you were in the other fellow's place, you would see just as the other fellow does, and you would be just as mad as the other fellow is with you when you don't keep your word. But whatever thing is wrong with you is merely a kink in your thinker. You are essentially right at heart, and you are one with God, whether you realize it or not. And you are in exactly the right place to work out the wisdom and power that God wills in and through you. Be still and know. If you are head over ears in debt and can't pay your bills, just have an honest talk with your biggest creditors and lay the big debts on the shelf until you get the little ones paid. Then you go at it tooth and nail to pay up those little debts just as fast as you can. Get every one of your little obligations wiped off. Every little debt is a vote from a fellow man for you to go to hell. Better have a few great big debts than a score of little ones. I once found myself very much in the position I fancy you may be, only on a smaller scale. I went to two men and told them just how I was situated. I fancy they had already begun to think I was deadbeat. But they quit thinking that and gave me their goodwill and agreed to wait for years if necessary for their money. Then I wiped off every one of the little debts, many of which were not of my making at all. By and by I got around to the big ones. It was several years, but I got there at last. And from the very minute that I had an understanding with those men and got the little debts wiped off, I felt free. The two creditors didn't hold me in condemnation, and I found that what they forgave was forgiven within me in heaven. And I found myself free to work and to make money as I never had before in my life. In fact, that was the beginning of my making money. And for goodness sake, don't make the foolish mistake of owing money through going security for someone else. No one on earth has a right to go security for another man unless his PIN money will cover that security in case of loss. In other words, if you have $1,000 in the bank, and above all your debts and obligations, $1,000 extra that is rolling uphill, you are entitled to go security for another to that extent. That was a little thing I learned from my father, a pioneer lumber manufacturer in Oregon, when I was a little girl. And curiously enough, I learned it because he did that very sort of thing for other persons. He was always going security for somebody and then worrying himself sick over it when somebody fizzled out and he had to pay. And through his worrying, I became conscious of the cause, and I received the fullness of the wisdom which he gained through his hard experiences. He admonished me never to go security for anybody unless I had PIN money to cover it. I remembered it, and I've lived up to that pretty well so far. So how should you make your money and spend it? Here's a man who asks, is it possible for one person to gain wealth without impoverishing another, at least indirectly? Most certainly. It is not the quantity of money on hand which makes a man wealthy, but the quantity of money which he circulates intelligently. The only way to gain wealth is to spend money wisely. If I pay out $1 for a worthless thing, I have impoverished myself. If I pay out $1 for that which to me is worth the full dollar and more, I have enriched myself. There is a difference between spending money and investing money. To spend money is to pay it out unintelligently for things which bring diminishing returns and leave a bad taste in the mouth. To invest money is to pay it out for something which brings lasting satisfaction. And this lasting satisfaction, one grinds up every day into more money. For lasting satisfaction is the joy of living, and joy in living fertilizes one's originality and multiplies his power for doing. I may invest $5 in a 14-course dinner, and the result is indigestion and loss of power. I may invest $5 in a book and gain from it suggestions and inspirations which enable me to make $1,000. In the first case, I have spent my money, gaining nothing in return. In the second case, I invested it wisely. And in the paying out of the money, I gain wealth, mental, spiritual, and material. And the man who sold me the book, along with the rest of the world, comes in for the blessings radiated from the center of satisfaction. My neighbor might pay $5 for the same book, and from it gain a mental indigestion with consequent dissatisfaction. That dissatisfaction would rain curses on the head of the salesman. All of which reminds me of what Emerson said: every man takes care that his neighbor shall not cheat him, but the day comes that he begins to care that he do not cheat his neighbor, then all goes well. If you are ever a success, it will be because you take hold of yourself and develop yourself and direct yourself in ways useful to the world about you. The world pays nobody except for work which it wants done. If you do better work than your neighbor, you can command better pay if you demand it. The world isn't going to give you better pay unless you 1. Work for it, and 2. Believe it your right, and 3. Insist upon having it. But if you never do good work till the world pays you high wages, you will never get high pay. You have to do such good work that the world will wake up and take notice, and that you are the one who does that good work. You have to do this whether you receive pay for it or not. In other words, when you are beginning in any line, you have to do good work for small pay, or for nothing, as a matter of advertisement of your work. Then, when those around you begin to demand your work, you can fix your pay according to right principles. If you are full of spite and contempt and ill feeling for those around you who have not paid you high prices for your work, you will cut off the connection between yourself and the good pay you want. All kinds of envy and criticism and fault-finding and ugly feeling demagnetize you so that you cannot attract the things that you desire. Goodwill to all, goodwill to the unjust as well as to the just, is the magnetic power which enables you to attract the things you desire. If you fill yourself with goodwill, it is as if you turned the current of electricity on to the wires that do the work. If you fill yourself with the envy and resentment and criticism and fault-finding of the world and the people around you, it is as if you turned off the goodwill power which does the work you want done. This is the whole thing in a nutshell. Go in to win and stick to it. Do good work and do it in goodwill to the world. And as a demand for your work increases, raise the price. Then there is another side of life that must be systematized. No matter how small your income, it must be so managed that there will always be a little laid by toward your savings account for the day of opportunity. Think it all over, and allot of your money for all things that is necessary to buy, taking pains that your saving account is not left to the last, but is reckoned in with the very important things like paying the grocer. See that your savings account grows every week and every month, if only by a 25-cent piece, and see that all your bills are paid before there are any luxuries. If you cast about you, you will find that even men in very poor circumstances indulge in a great many luxuries. Wastefulness is the greatest luxury in which they indulge. The poor girl in the kitchen is more wasteful than her mistress, would be if she were in the same place, just because she is more careless and is determined to manage well the things at her command. Men who are not rich are apt to be more wasteful than men who have larger incomes. And it all comes out of a mismanagement of funds, the failure to plan expenditure so that funds will cover the ground in the best way and leave a good margin for savings and the unexpected. Wastefulness is a relative term, as you can readily see. Whatever money goes for things that you do not really want and which do not tend to advance you in the direction in which you wish to go is money wasted. Organize your spending that every penny will be spent for power. As Frank Andrews, bursar of New York University, says. So, this is an older teaching. Clearly, there are parts of this I even had to remove where she's talking about dealing with the farmers and the settlers of the community and the price that she has for an expensive meal. It's very fun to go back in time and imagine where she's talking, but most of it is sort of evergreen, and you can take out of it some common lessons about debt. Just remember, what you focus on, you get more of, but make it something serious. I was also thinking about Frederick Dotson's book, Prosperity Consciousness, and he really makes the point, you need to know everything that you're spending and have a full understanding of all of your funds, which she is emphasizing here. Then go about paying it off. And if you can't pay it off, make an arrangement, but don't ignore it. Don't be that person that has the debt and just forgets about it and ignores it. It will come back. It's in your subconscious now when you ignore it. And it can create sickness, and it can create sickness in your life. Because if you are rich, you would pay your debts. So you're imagining the wealth that you need. As Neville Goddard says, do not be afraid. Don't tell anybody you're hungry, for everything is yours. Slay what you want and eat it, for you are God. She also has a pretty good suggestion at the beginning. If you are in deeper debt or have more work, then pray more. And all of the answers that you will find will be found as you go into the silence. Don't be hard on yourself. Accept yourself for who you are. And if you have to sacrifice some land or something, that is more important. But I have met brothers and sisters out there that just have unbelievable situations once I was able to really get them to admit their debt situation. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And the feelings that evokes in my body, it creates a feedback loop. So I would love it to find a way for everybody to go out of debt. And we can do that with this wonderful affirmation. If you start to worry about your debt, I want you to say this affirmation. Do your best to get an understanding of what your debt is. Don't overly focus on it. Make arrangements for automatic payments on as many debts as you can, and create a strategy. Envision looking at the credit card statement with a zero balance. Sometimes that works. But more importantly, envision large sums of money coming to you easily and quickly. But in regards to your debts, when they do worry you, you want to have a strategy of what you can say and do. And I just want you to say to yourself these words. I am so happy and grateful for the complete payment of all financial obligations in God's own wonderful way. One more time, you just think about that. I am so happy and grateful. You would be incredibly happy and grateful if you had your debt suddenly paid off for the complete payment, not just a partial payment. You're not paying it down and you owe a little bit less. For the complete payment of all financial obligations, not a little one, not this one, not that one, all financial obligations in God's own wonderful way, meaning that you don't have to think in your mind of how it's going to happen. Assume that a solution will occur to you and just say those words. I am so happy and grateful for the complete payment of all financial obligations in God's own wonderful way. I hope that that helps you. If you are in debt, if not, then that's wonderful. And do your best with what you take, this material and other material. But that is something, in many cases, the reason I wanted this episode is something that is taking the power away. I'll meet somebody and I just trying to they're really doing all the work. They're meditating, they're doing all the work, and they should be having greater success. And then I find out that they have this debt. And so the debt can reduce your power. So first of all, you need to cut the power and understand your mental relationship with this debt. Assume that it's a good thing. Don't let it hover in the back of your mind. Make it your intention that you will be making enough money that this debt will be irrelevant anyway. And it will. Don't make it about the debt. Make it about the money coming in to pay the debt. And it will happen for you. I promise. I am imagining a flood, an avalanche of abundance for you, expressing itself in so many perfect ways. All episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.